This project is probably the greatest example of a crafter's ability to adapt to any situation. I gotta be honest, I don't think any of this went as I planned, and very few things turned out right the first time around, but here I am with the video, so let's dive right into this incredibly frustrating sequence of events. Weeks ago, maybe even months ago at this point, not that I would know because I don't know anything about how time passes, I put together this rough little sketch of how I wanted my mushroom costume to come together. The goal was to create a simple ombre dyed dress out of some of that excess purple fabric that I have and some black dye, and then make a small little mushroom hat with a pair of gold pauldrons, melty wax candles, put some melty wax candles on the hat, also a cool face veil, maybe a little bit of beaded fringe. It's a very cool and fun concept, right? Yeah, well, let's not get too attached to it. The dress being made out of purple fabric and the general construction and color palette stays the same, but that's about it. Thus begins our series of unfortunate events, beginning at the end of things where I found out I deleted all the footage that I had of making this dress. It was mixed in with footage for a different project and I completely forgot about that. I deleted it permanently. It is not even in the recycling bin, it's just gone. On the bright side, the dress is nothing too new. It's a pattern we've seen many times before on this channel, in fact even in the last video, because I am obsessed with the sleeves of this dress. I love this pattern. I love not buying new patterns, especially when old patterns work just fine. So for the bust and sleeve sections of this dress, I leave them exactly as the pattern has them, but for the lower half of the dress, I measured on myself how long I wanted that section to be, and then using that measurement, marked out a pattern for the front and back of the skirt. And by marked out a pattern, I mean I just went off of vibes and what I felt looked good. I would love to show you what the dress looked like at this point, but somebody deleted the footage forever, so we're moving on to the black dye part of things. But of course, in the fashion of things continuing to go wrong, as you may have seen in the intro of last week's video, turns out my fabric would not take the all-purpose RIT dye. My fabric was washed in a machine, it was fully wet when I dyed it, or when I tried to dye it. I put in extra dye to see if a more concentrated solution would help. I put the recommended additives, none of it worked. So I waited another week for synthetic fabric dye to come in the mail. Had some fun with that cauldron of stained soup, only to find out that it also did not work. I literally left it in for several hours, nothing changed. I don't know what happened. If anyone has any advice on how to not make this happen next time, or if anybody even has an inkling of why my fabric did not take the dye, I would love to know. Please, somebody help. But yeah, that was incredibly frustrating, and I did the only reasonable thing here and laid on the ground in a pile of frustration and disappointment. My cats joined me in solidarity. That was great. Even my husband, who didn't know why I was on the floor, joined me. He saw me on the ground and decided to provide the highest level of support a partner can, and also joined the pile of smut. Look at this, that's peak relationship right there. But if you think that's where I gave up, boy howdy, you're wrong, because I decided that the third solution to my problems would be to make an exceptionally soupy fabric paint out of a mix of fabric softener and acrylic paint, and saturate the ends of my fabric with it. Now, I need you to listen to me. Pay attention. This is not a good alternative solution to create an even ombre dye. If you want something nice, beautiful, with a smooth transition, do not do this. The dried result is very blotchy, very uneven. It dries on matte, it takes away the texture and shine of the fabric. Since I was going for a very cursed and inedible looking mushroom, horrible uneven blotches all over the bottom of the dress is kind of a vibe, but it is not even close to the effect that ombre dip dyeing gives your fabric. So I don't want anybody coming here and causing a ruckus because they thought this was a good idea, because no, do not follow me. This is a trail of bad decisions and misery. So with all of that out of the way and very little footage to show for it, let's talk about the more important part of things, the mushroom hat. So the mushroom hat, very popular about a year ago. Honestly, I'm more of a cosplay person myself, so despite the entire branding of my channel revolving around mushrooms, it's really not a trend I ever thought I would hop on. I was pretty sure I was too late to get to that ship. But then my older sister made a mushroom costume this year, and I am a very supportive sibling and also a sucker for themed group costumes. So you know what, I figured it was time, sorta, because I didn't actually finish this costume in time to wear it to the Ren Fair with her, but next year for sure. There are a lot of tutorials online on how to make a mushroom hat out of cardboard, paper mache, fabric, all sorts of materials. I figured it was time to get over my fear of EVA foam and try and construct the hat out of that. I purchased my pattern from an Etsy seller called Of the Forest. This seller has several different fungi hat patterns as well as a flower hat. They're lovely, they're very well written patterns, detailed instructions. Do not take my failures with this project as an indication of her skills as a pattern maker. Instead of choosing one of her flatter capped mushroom hats like in my original design, I was very enamored by her inky cap mushroom hat, and I went with that one instead because I felt like it kind of fit the color palette. Now, to be perfectly honest, I do think I could have made this mushroom hat from scratch without a pattern, but I was really nervous working with EVA foam. Having a pattern decreased the anxiety that I inherited from my mother just enough that I was able to settle in the hubris that is me thinking I can do pretty much anything crafting related as long as I've watched a YouTube video or two, which I inherited from my father, although his is about things like building houses and fixing lawnmowers and things like that, which is infinitely more useful in life. But anyways, with both halves of the genetic pool balancing each other out, I cut out my pattern to realize this is like big. So the thing about this pattern is that it's supposed to be customizable. So when you buy it, it comes in the PDF as one page, and you use the poster feature in your printer settings to blow it up to whatever size that you want. The author never gave a recommended scale to use. Now, a fun fact about me is that I'm really bad at approximating measurements of size and distance. I have no idea how big or small things are, including myself, and if you ask me to drive down a street and turn onto a road that's about a half mile away, I would be entirely unable to do it. But I did know that this was pretty big. But instead of reprinting the pattern and going out to buy more tape, social anxiety won today, and I decided to measure various points of the pattern pieces, make ratios of them, and scale the entire piece down. Little did I know that this would still be really big. But it wasn't so big that I couldn't cut 8 little mushroom wedges out of my craft foam using the X-Acto knives that I yoinked out of my partner's toolbox, most of which really needed new blades. And finally, it was time for assembly. This pattern is made of 2 pieces that are mirror images of each other that you assemble together in these little petals and then eventually into a bell shape. Now, I feel like I always see people who are able to just use contact glue and have their EVA foam pieces stick together regardless of the tension. I personally have never had such luck with my glue, no matter what I do or what I use. But the pattern I was reading recommended to physically pin together the foam with sewing pins, which 10 out of 10, highly recommend. The foam has plenty of spring back that the little pinhole doesn't create a major visual issue, and putting the pins in from alternating sides distributes pressure evenly so that you don't have to worry as much about the tension of the foam bending, pulling your pieces apart. I ran out of my E6000 glue not even a quarter of the way into the project and had to swap over to rubber cement, and it still worked great because I didn't have to hold the pieces together while waiting for the glue to get tacky enough because of the pins. I started out with using my cheaper pins that were very cute, but their tops do not stay on at all. But in the end, it didn't matter because I had to swap over to my good pins anyways because I ran out of the other ones. For the most part, the glue didn't stick to the pins in a way that I wasn't able to clean them off relatively easily, and they seemed to retain most of their sharpness. The only issue I had was that some of the pins got bent and some of the pin head color got scratched off because I had to use pliers to pull them out. You know, if you're planning on doing this yourself, I wouldn't recommend using a set of pins that you are particularly partial to, but other than that, their reusability in sewing projects seems decent. Now, I did actually start putting together pauldrons for this outfit, but once I got all the sides of the mushroom wedges together into one cohesive hat, I tried it on and realized it's big. This is pretty big. If I wanted to have any line of sight at all, it would have to sit a little bit tilted back on my head instead of just flat, and basically rest on the back of my shoulders, which would mess with any kind of pauldron that I put on my shoulders. So I decided to not do the pauldrons at all. Once again, continuing my streak of not making the foam armor that I intended to. But yeah, once all the petals were together, we ran into yet another issue. Once again, just re-emphasizing my inability to accurately do math in any way that matters. But if this project hasn't been about finding weird solutions to the problems I create for myself, I don't know what it's about. So I cut out a patch of foam to glue on the inside of the hat, then fill the star-shaped hole on the top with a bunch of little foam scraps like a horrible little mosaic, and grout the gaps with something called Dynaflex. It's a silicone-based sealant. It's got a lot of flexibility even after it dries. I have seen other cosplayers use it to fill joints in foam armor. Not really to the extreme that I'm doing here, but you know, it's been done. Normally this has a dry time of a couple hours, and for the most part that is true, but if you are frosting over the consequences of your own actions and the sins of your past, I would highly recommend waiting for at least 24 hours before doing anything dramatic. Now, it was at this point that I really settled into yet another hard truth of this project, and that was despite my greatest efforts, I was not going to be able to get a perfectly smooth and even surface on my mushroom. So instead of trying to fight it, I decided to yes and the texture by taking a soldering iron and melting the foam down to create little ridges around the brim, as well as little bug holes and tunnels in random spots throughout the hat. 10 out of 10, very satisfying. I only burned myself once. So once I was satisfied with the additional texture, I decided to take the hat outside and cover the entire thing in black Plastidip to create a more even surface. But I don't know if it's because the can was several years old and not properly stored, or if it was just a nozzle malfunction, but either way, it did not come out super evenly, despite how much I tried to shake and homogenize the contents within the can. It would just spray out a bunch of large droplets every once in a while, but that didn't stop me because we're already this far. If I get bonus texture from the droplets, so be it. At the end of the day, we have our hat fully covered in Plastidip, which means I can finally start painting this thing purple to match the dress. While the Plastidip didn't do much in terms of making the surface any smoother texturally, it did create a really nice base for the acrylic paint so that it didn't get absorbed into the foam. The paint mattified all these shiny bits created by the Dynaflex and shinified the matte bits that were as a result of the foam. It is not perfect, but it finally actually started looking like a unified object. Now, I mixed the purple to a pretty good match to the fabric when it was wet, but it did dry quite a bit darker, which I should have anticipated, but it is what it is. Once that paint layer was dry, I took some shredded foam and filled the entire inside of the top of this hat up so that I could sit a little sun hat in the foam and glue the brim of the hat to the inside of the mushroom cap. So the foam maybe was a little bit unnecessary, but I was worried that if I didn't put something between the hat and the mushroom, the weight of the cap would cause the brim to sink, and I really would love to be able to see while wearing this thing. I feel like that's not a huge ask, so that's why I put all this foam in there. And now for some fun stuff. I got these candles that I think are supposed to be Christmas decorations or something. They are battery powered, but they also turn on and off using a remote. Not super consistently, but they do. I specifically wanted ones with a remote because I didn't want to have to take these candles in and out of the hat to turn them on and off. But what are you gonna do when the battery dies? I don't know. We'll figure that out when that's a problem. Now, this was probably the scariest part of this entire project. I had to cut holes into my mushroom hat to make spaces for the candles to sit inside of. I didn't want the candles to be left to their full height, but also once a hole was made, it was made. There's not really any going back about it. Despite the anxiety, this part was very instantly gratifying. I stuck the candles in and used hot glue to both solidify their place and also create fun melty wax strips. The hot glue was also hot enough to melt the plastic that the candles were made of, which added a lot of unexpected randomness to the drips, but honestly, of all the things that went unexpectedly in this project, I was the least worried about how precise these drips looked. And of course, I couldn't just put all these candles in without an obligatory test run. I am just too wide. I'm like, what is the point? Like, they're never gonna let me in the shops. If they put me in the place where they sell glass and pottery, I'm gonna be like, oh, so sorry. And for a little bit of that extra razzle-dazzle, I took some gold paint and sponged the ends of the drips and the edge of the mushroom cap. To be honest, this was supposed to be a tie-in to a bunch of little gold chains that I was planning on hanging between the candles and on the edge of the mushroom cap, but I couldn't find my box of little gold trinkets and chains that I've collected like a crow over the last few years, so I guess these gold details are just for funsies, and I hope I find that box soon because I really like some of the things in there. Now onto the gills of the mushroom. In the original drawing, I made these black because I wanted to wear my white wig with the outfit back when I thought this was going to be a cute little mushroom hat and not a proportionally accurate mushroom hat. Now, in the interest of balance and contrast, I decided that I would make the gills white instead, mostly because I have a lot more white fabric than black on account of I keep going to the thrift store and seeing white curtains and buying them, but secondarily on account of me deciding that also bundling all my hair up inside of a wig and then putting this hat on and then walking around dehydrated at a Renaissance fair is just a headache waiting to happen. I used my pins again to keep the fabric in place as I went over it with hot glue. I wish I had hot glued the fabric onto the inside of the hat instead of just outside the hat. I think it would have looked a lot neater, but I tried it on to see how bad it looked and honestly, it looked pretty okay. At this point, we're just trying to get to an end product. And for the very last detail, I had this really cute thematically drippy black lace fringe that I hot glued around the rim. Originally, the hat was going to have a series of veils to look like the annulus on a mushroom, but since the hat kind of sits at an angle on the back of my head instead of just directly on top of my head, I was not very confident about where I should attach the veils so that it would drape around my face instead of just on my face. I put up with a lot of textural nightmares when it comes to my costumes, but I'm not about that one. Plus, with the gills of the mushroom resting basically on the back of my neck, I figured it wouldn't have the visual effect I was trying to achieve anyways, so there's no veil. But for the last finishing touch on the trim, I used a hair straightener to iron out the crumpled lace, and with that, we can head on to the reveal. Pin in here. Yes. Here we are. Mushroom and dead shrew. This hat was an adventure. We had our ups, we had our downs, we had our successes, we mostly had failures, but I have a mushroom hat and I have a coordinating outfit that I'm not wearing right now. A lot went wrong with this. This didn't turn out the way that I had hoped. I was trying to be a very scary mushroom witch, and I'm giving League of Legends Lulu, which is fine, it's fine. I have not given up on my quest to be simultaneously 5 feet tall and also spooky, but today was just not the day that we got there. Someday we will. But since you've heard plenty of how I'm not pleased with this hat, let's talk a little bit of the ways that I am super happy with how this hat came out. I am obsessed with the candles. I think the candles look amazing. Yeah, the sheer amount of joy that they bring me is a lot for being battery operated candles. Will it look cool at the Ren Fair at high noon? Probably not, but it still makes me incredibly happy anyways. I'm a huge fan of the trim. When I first got this trim, I was a little bit disappointed. I thought I wanted something longer, and I thought I wanted something that had actual beads instead of just this lacy stuff, but I ended up liking the lace way more than I thought I would. Also, the fact that it's lace and not beads means the hat is not any heavier than it already is. That being said, for as big of a hat as it is surprisingly light. Don't get me wrong, this is a very noticeable addition to my head, but it could have been a lot more unwieldy than it is. Also, everybody say thank you to my younger sister for her generous contribution to this outfit. Also, everybody say thank you to my older sister for helping me film the reveal. It was very cool of her to be willing to go into my spooky basement with me. And thank you for putting up with this chaos mess of a video. I love and appreciate each and every one of you. I thank you so much for your patience while I've been working to get these videos out, and it really means a lot to me that you all keep on watching my videos and keep on supporting me. I love you guys. But now that I've actually gotten to work a little bit with EVA foam properly, and I have more knowledge and better tools and understanding about how these things work, maybe I'll stop skirting around the subject of foam armor. But who knows? Not me.